The Aurora Blueshift drifted through the void like a predator stalking its prey, her hull scarred by countless battles yet still gleaming with the defiant pride of humanity's finest warship. Captain Zephyr Valdris stood on the bridge, his weathered hands gripping the command rail as he watched the tactical display paint a grim picture of their situation. 3 Vex-High dreadnoughts had been hunting them for 6 standard days, their massive forms cutting through space with the inexorable patience of death itself. "Captain, long-range sensors are picking up another fleet movement in Sector 7, reported Ensign Lyra Ashwind, her voice carefully controlled despite the tremor that betrayed her fear. The young communications officer had joined the crew only months before the war began, and now she found herself at the center of humanity's most desperate hour. The holographic display before her showed dozens of red blips converging on their position, each one representing enough firepower to reduce a small moon to cosmic dust. Commander Katha Nerian looked up from her tactical console, her dark eyes meeting the captain's gaze. She had served alongside Valdris for over a decade, through the border conflicts and the siege of New Geneva, but nothing had prepared them for the systematic extermination campaign the Vex-High had launched against human colonies. "Sir, if those readings are accurate, we're looking at a full battle group. 17 capital ships, at least 40 escorts. They're not just hunting us anymore, they're moving to glass the Kepler system." The weight of that revelation settled over the bridge like a shroud. Kepler housed nearly 2 billion human souls across its 4 inhabited worlds, including the research station where Dr. Sylvain Mordek had been developing humanity's most ambitious project, a weapon that could theoretically level the playing field against the technologically superior Vex-High. If the enemy reached Kepler before the Aurora Blueshift could warn them, billions would die in the opening minutes of the assault. Lieutenant Orion Thex emerged from the engineering section, his uniform stained with coolant fluid and his face grim with exhaustion. The young engineer had been pushing the ship's exotic matter drive beyond all safety parameters, coaxing every erg of power from systems that should have failed days ago. "Captain, I've managed to squeeze another 12% efficiency from the primary drives, but we're running on borrowed time. The quantum stabilizers are showing stress fractures, and if they fail during a jump..." Valdris didn't need the explanation completed. A drive failure in hyperspace would scatter their atoms across several light-years, but staying in normal space meant certain death when the Vex-High caught up. The alien species had emerged from the galactic rim 18 months ago with technology that made humanity's finest achievements look like stone tools. Their ships moved faster, hit harder, and seemed to anticipate human tactics with an almost supernatural prescience. "Options, Commander Nerian?" Valdris asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. The Aurora Blueshift was one of only 3 Prometheus-class ships in the human fleet, equipped with experimental weapons and defensive systems that had been designed to face threats humanity had never imagined. Yet even she seemed insignificant against the vast armada pursuing them. Nerian's fingers danced across her console, running probability calculations and tactical simulations with the desperate efficiency of someone who knew that the wrong decision would doom not just their ship, but potentially their entire species. "We have 2 choices, sir. We can attempt to outrun them to Kepler and hope our warning gives the system enough time to evacuate, or we can turn and fight here, try to buy time for other ships to reach the colonies first." The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of life support systems and the distant throb of the exotic matter drive. Every member of the crew understood the implications. If they ran, they might save Kepler but allow the Vex-High fleet to regroup and strike elsewhere. If they fought, They would almost certainly die, but their sacrifice might give other human forces the intelligence needed to mount an effective defense. Valdris closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of command settle on his shoulders like armor forged from the hopes and fears of his species. When he opened them again, his decision was clear.
Set course for the Kepler system, maximum sustainable velocity, Captain Valdris commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had made peace with his choices. Commander Nerian, begin preparation for a running engagement. If we're going to lead them on a chase, we'll make them pay for every light second. The Aurora Blueshift responded to her crew's urgency like a living thing, her massive frame shuddering as Lieutenant Thex pushed the exotic matter drive beyond its design specifications. The ship's advanced hull began to shimmer with an ethereal blue glow as spacetime warped around them, propelling them toward a destination that might already be burning by the time they arrived. Dr. Sylvain Mordek appeared on the bridge, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled from hours spent in the ship's most classified laboratory. The elderly scientist clutched a data pad to his chest like a shield, his eyes bright with the manic intensity of a man who had glimpsed either salvation or damnation. "Captain, I need to speak with you privately. What I've discovered could change everything, but the implications." Valdris studied the doctor's face, noting the fear that warred with excitement in the older man's expression. Mordek had been working on something called Project Prometheus for the past 3 years, a weapons program so classified that even Valdris didn't know its full scope. The fact that the scientist was emerging from his laboratory now, with Vexhai ships breathing down their necks, suggested either a breakthrough or a catastrophe. "My ready room, Doctor." "Commander Nerian, you have the bridge. Maintain our heading and keep those hunters at maximum sensor range. If they so much as twitch in our direction, I want to know about it." As they walked through the ship's corridors, Valdris noticed the subtle signs of strain that spoke to their desperate situation. Crew members moved with the efficient urgency of people who knew they were racing against time itself. Damage control teams rushed past carrying replacement components for systems that were failing under the stress of their extended flight. The very air seemed to thrum with tension, as if the ship itself understood the magnitude of their mission. Mordek sealed the ready room door behind them and activated the privacy field, his hands shaking slightly as he placed the data pad on the table between them. "Captain, what I'm about to show you will sound like madness, but I swear to you on my reputation as a scientist that everything I'm about to tell you is true. The weapon we've been developing isn't just a new type of torpedo or energy beam. It's something far more dangerous and far more powerful." The display activated, showing complex mathematical equations that hurt to look at directly, as if they described realities that human minds weren't meant to comprehend. Valdris had seen exotic physics before. The Aurora Blueshift's own drive system operated on principles that would have been considered impossible just decades earlier, but these calculations seemed to push the boundaries of science into something approaching metaphysics. "The Prometheus device manipulates fundamental forces at the quantum level," Mordek continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Not just matter and energy, but the underlying structure of spacetime itself. In laboratory conditions, we've been able to create localized reality distortions that essentially delete everything within a specific area from existence. Not destroy, Captain, delete. As if it never existed at all." Valdris felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. The implications were staggering and terrifying. If humanity possessed such a weapon, it could indeed level the playing field against the Vexhai. But the moral weight of wielding something that could literally erase matter from existence was almost unbearable to contemplate. "What are you telling me, Doctor? That we have a weapon that could stop their entire fleet?" Mordek's laugh held no humor, only the bitter sound of a man who had stared into an abyss and found it staring back. "Stop them? Captain, if my calculations are correct, this device could unravel the quantum foundations of an entire star system. We're not talking about a weapon of mass destruction, we're talking about a weapon of mass annihilation. The question isn't whether we can stop the HFY. The question is whether we dare use something that could unmake creation itself." The ready room fell silent as both men contemplated the terrible responsibility that had fallen into their hands. Outside, the stars wheeled past as the Aurora Blueshift raced toward a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of the Kepler system, but potentially the future of warfare itself. Somewhere behind them, alien ships pursued with the relentless hunger of predators who had never known defeat, unaware that their prey had become something far more dangerous than they could imagine. The tactical briefing room aboard the Aurora Blueshift had been converted into an impromptu war council, its polished surfaces reflecting the grim faces of the ship's senior staff. Captain Valdris stood before the main display, which showed the current disposition of HFY forces and their projected intercept courses with human-controlled systems. The red markers seemed to pulse with malevolent intent, each one representing untold destruction moving inexorably toward innocent worlds. Commander Nerian activated a secondary display showing historical battle data from the past 18 months of conflict. The statistics painted a devastating picture of humanity's struggle against their alien adversaries. Since first contact at the Rigel outpost, we've lost 67% of our outer colonies and 43% of our deep space fleet. The HFY don't just conquer territory, they systematically eliminate every trace of human presence, down to the molecular level. Lieutenant Thex pulled up engineering schematics of known HFY vessels, his young face bearing the weight of someone who had studied his enemy with obsessive dedication. Their technology operates on principles we're only beginning to understand. Their hulls seem to exist in a state of quantum flux, making them incredibly resistant to conventional weapons. Our best kinetic rounds and plasma charges barely scratch their armor, while their own weapons can punch through our shields like they're made of paper. Ensign Ashwin shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her communications expertise having given her unique insight into the enemy's psychological warfare tactics. "Sir, during our retreat from the Procyon system, I managed to decode some of their tactical transmissions. What I found was disturbing. They don't refer to us as enemies or even as inferior beings. In their language, we're classified as an ontological error, something that shouldn't exist and needs to be corrected." The weight of that revelation settled over the room like a physical presence. Valdris had commanded warships in 3 previous conflicts, but never had he faced an enemy that viewed his species as a fundamental mistake in the universe's design. The HFY weren't conquering humanity, they were editing it out of existence with the cold efficiency of fact-checkers correcting a historical record. Dr. Mordek cleared his throat, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he prepared to share information that could doom or save their species. The Prometheus device represents our only hope of changing the tactical balance, but its implementation comes with risks that extend far beyond the immediate battle zone. The weapon doesn't just affect matter and energy, it affects the quantum foundations of reality itself. He activated a complex holographic model that showed spacetime as a 3-dimensional web of interconnected threads. As the assembled officers watched, sections of the web simply vanished, leaving gaps that cause the surrounding structure to shift and buckle in unpredictable ways. When the device activates, it creates what we call a reality cascade, a spreading zone where the normal laws of physics begin to break down. In laboratory tests, we've seen effects ranging from temporal displacement to spontaneous matter conversion. Valdres studied the display with the practiced eye of a career military officer, but the implications made his head spin. "Doctor, are you telling me that this weapon could damage the fabric of space itself?" "More than damage, Captain. It could fundamentally alter how reality operates in the affected area. The cascade effect is theoretically self-limiting, but our models suggest it could propagate across several light-years before stabilizing. Any ships, planets, or even stars caught in that zone might experience effects that we can't predict or control." Commander Nerian leaned forward, her tactical mind already wrestling with the strategic implications. "How large an area are we talking about, Doctor? If we use this weapon against the Vex-High fleet, what would be the extent of the affected zone?" Mordek's expression grew even more troubled as he manipulated the holographic display, showing spreading circles of distortion radiating out from a central point. "Based on our current power output estimates, the initial effect would encompass roughly 1 cubic light-year. The cascade could potentially extend that to 5 or 6 times that volume, depending on local gravitational conditions and quantum field density." The room fell silent as each officer contemplated the magnitude of what they were discussing. The Prometheus device wasn't just a weapon, it was a fundamental alteration of reality itself, with consequences that could echo across space and time in ways they couldn't comprehend. Yet outside their ship, billions of human lives hung in the balance, and conventional weapons had proven utterly inadequate against their alien adversaries. Lieutenant Thex spoke into the silence, his young voice carrying a weight beyond his years. "Sir, with respect to Dr. Mordek's concerns, we've already seen what happens when we fight the Vex-High with conventional weapons. They don't just defeat us, they erase us. Maybe it's time to show them that humanity refuses to be deleted quietly." The Aurora Blueshift sensor array detected the Vex-High pursuit fleet as a constellation of malevolent stars against the cosmic backdrop, their exotic energy signatures burning like wounds in spacetime itself. Captain Valdres stood in the ship's observation deck, watching their hunters close the distance with the implacable patience of entropy itself. The alien vessels moved in perfect geometric formations that hurt to observe directly, as if their very presence challenged fundamental assumptions about how reality should behave. Commander Nerian joined him at the reinforced viewport, her reflection ghost-like against the star field. Long-range sensors confirm 17 capital ships and 43 escorts, exactly as our initial estimates suggested. They're maintaining pursuit velocity and will achieve weapons range in 14 hours, 37 minutes. If we maintain current heading and speed, we'll reach the Kepler system approximately 6 hours after they achieve firing position. The mathematics of their situation were brutally simple. The Vex-High would catch them well before they reached their destination, and once that happened, the Aurora Blueshift would have perhaps minutes before her defenses were overwhelmed. Valdres had seen the aftermath of Vex-High attacks, ships that simply ceased to exist, leaving behind not even debris to mark their passing. The aliens didn't destroy their enemies so much as edit them out of existence, as if their very presence offended some cosmic sense of order. "Status report on the Prometheus device, Commander." Nerian consulted her data pad, though Valdres suspected she already knew the information by heart. Dr. Mordek reports that final calibrations will be complete within 8 hours. The device is currently operating within acceptable parameters, though he continues to express concerns about the potential for cascade failure. Lieutenant Thex has rerouted power from non-essential systems to ensure adequate charging capacity. Through the viewport, space seemed to shimmer and bend around the pursuing Vex-High ships, their presence warping the fundamental structure of reality. Valdris had read the classified reports about their technology, weapons that fired packets of restructured spacetime, shields that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, engines that moved their ships through folded reality rather than conventional space. Humanity's greatest scientific achievement seemed primitive by comparison. Dr. Mordek appeared in the observation deck's entrance, his face pale with exhaustion and something deeper, a haunted expression that spoke to the moral weight of what he had created. "Captain, I need to show you something. The final simulations have revealed an aspect of the Prometheus device that we hadn't anticipated." They made their way to the secure laboratory deep within the ship's hull, past checkpoints manned by Marines whose faces showed the strain of their impossible mission. The lab itself was a marvel of human engineering, filled with equipment that operated on the bleeding edge of theoretical physics. At its center sat the Prometheus device, a deceptively simple crystalline structure barely larger than a human head, surrounded by containment fields that sparkled with barely contained energy. "The device doesn't just affect matter and energy," Mordek explained, activating a series of displays that showed complex quantum field interactions. "It affects consciousness itself. During our tests, we noticed that observers within the affected area experience temporal displacement, memory alteration, and in some cases, complete personality restructuring. The boundary between observer and observed begins to break down at the quantum level." Valdris felt a chill that had nothing to do with the laboratory's environmental controls. "Doctor, are you telling me that this weapon could affect the minds of anyone nearby when it activates?" "More than that, Captain. The cascade effect appears to propagate through quantum entanglement patterns that exist in all conscious beings. Anyone with sufficient neural complexity within the affected area doesn't just witness reality being restructured, they become part of that restructuring. Their thoughts, memories, and essential identity could be altered or even erased entirely." The implications were staggering. The Prometheus device wasn't just a weapon that could delete matter from existence, it was something that could fundamentally alter the nature of consciousness itself. Using it against the Vex-High fleet would indeed stop their advance, but at a cost that might be worse than defeat. Anyone caught in the cascade effect would be changed in ways that couldn't be predicted or reversed. "How large is the consciousness effect zone?" Valdris asked, though he dreaded the answer. Mordek manipulated the display to show expanding spheres of influence radiating out from the device's activation point. The direct effect encompasses roughly the same area as the reality cascade, potentially several light-years in diameter. But the quantum entanglement propagation could theoretically affect conscious beings much further away, particularly those with advanced neural structures or technological implants. Valdris stared at the crystalline device, understanding that he held in his hands not just the potential salvation of humanity, but also its possible damnation. The Vex-High were closing in with their superior technology and their mission to erase humanity from existence. But stopping them with the Prometheus device might require sacrificing everything that made humanity worth saving in the first place. The Aurora Blueshift's bridge had become a cathedral of tension, its normally efficient atmosphere thick with the weight of impossible decisions. Captain Valdris stood before the main tactical display, watching as the Vex-High pursuit fleet continued its relentless advance. The alien ships moved through space like antibodies through a bloodstream, their purpose singular and unwavering, the complete eradication of what they perceived as a cosmic infection. Ensign Ashwind looked up from her communications console, her young face bearing the strain of someone who had intercepted transmissions never meant for human ears. "Captain, I've been monitoring Vex-High command frequencies for the past 6 hours. Their tactical chatter suggests they're not just hunting us, they're coordinating with other fleet elements across multiple sectors. This isn't an isolated pursuit. It's part of a coordinated campaign to eliminate every human presence in this entire region of space." The revelation struck the bridge crew like a physical blow. They had assumed their desperate flight was simply the unfortunate result of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, but the reality was far worse. The Vex-High weren't just responding to their presence, they were implementing a systematic genocide that stretched across dozens of star systems. Commander Nerian pulled up strategic displays showing human settlements throughout the sector, each one marked with current threat assessments and estimated survival times. The pattern was clear and terrifying. The aliens were methodically working their way through human-controlled space, leaving behind nothing but empty systems scoured clean of any trace of terrestrial life. "Sir, based on current Vex-High movement patterns and attack velocities, I estimate that every human colony in the Outer Rim will be eliminated within 36 standard days," Nerian reported, her voice carefully controlled despite the horror of what she was describing. "The core worlds might last another few months, but without the industrial capacity of the outer colonies, they'll be defenseless when the final assault comes." Lieutenant Thex emerged from the engineering section, his uniform soaked with sweat and coolant fluid. The young engineer had been pushing the ship's exotic matter drive far beyond its design limitations, coaxing every erg of power from systems that should have failed hours ago. "Captain, I've managed to extract another 8% efficiency from the primary drives, but we're approaching critical cascade failure. The quantum stabilizers are showing stress fractures that could propagate through the entire drive assembly." Valdris absorbed the reports with the stoic acceptance of a commander who had long since made peace with his mortality. The Aurora Blueshift was dying by degrees, her advanced systems gradually succumbing to the stress of their extended flight. Even if they somehow evaded the Vex-High pursuit fleet, the ship might not survive long enough to reach safe harbor. Dr. Mordek appeared on the bridge, his elderly frame supported by a walking cane that hadn't been necessary just days earlier. The strain of preparing the Prometheus device had taken a visible toll on the scientist, aging him visibly as the weight of his creation pressed down upon his conscience. "Captain, the device is fully charged and ready for deployment. However, I must stress once more the catastrophic risks involved in its use." The old scientist activated a holographic display that showed the Kepler system in exquisite detail, for inhabited worlds orbiting a stable G-class star, home to nearly 2 billion human souls. Cities gleamed like jewels against planetary surfaces, space stations traced elegant orbits through the void, and hundreds of civilian vessels moved along established shipping lanes, all unaware that annihilation was racing toward them through the darkness. "If we deploy the Prometheus device against the Vex-High fleet, the cascade effect will propagate throughout this entire region of space," Mordek explained, his voice heavy with the weight of terrible knowledge. "Every human being in the Kepler system, every man, woman, and child on those worlds, will be caught in the consciousness alteration field. They might survive physically, but their minds, their very identities, could be fundamentally restructured in ways we cannot predict or control." The bridge fell silent as the crew contemplated the horrific choice before them. They could allow the Vexhai to reach Kepler and witness the systematic extermination of 2 billion innocent people, or they could deploy a weapon that might save those lives at the cost of everything that made them human. Either path led to a form of genocide. The only question was whether it would be perpetrated by alien invaders or by humanity's own desperate weapon. Valdres closed his eyes and tried to imagine the weight of 2 billion souls balanced against the unknown consequences of quantum consciousness manipulation. When he opened them again, his decision was reflected in the grim determination of his expression. The Vexhai had given humanity no choice but to evolve or die, and evolution always came with a price that couldn't be calculated in advance.
The final hours before weapon deployment transformed the Aurora Blueshift into a vessel haunted by the ghosts of its own future. Captain Valdres walked through corridors where crew members moved with the mechanical precision of people who had accepted their fate but not yet made peace with it. Every face he passed reflected the same terrible understanding: they were about to cross a threshold from which humanity might never return. In the ship's chapel, a converted storage bay that served multiple faiths, nearly a third of the crew had gathered for what might be their final service. Valdres paused in the doorway, watching as humans from dozens of worlds and belief systems sought comfort in ancient rituals that had sustained their species through countless previous crises. The sight filled him with both pride and profound sadness, knowing that the consciousness patterns that made such faith possible might be forever altered by what they were about to unleash. Lieutenant Thex met him outside the chapel, the young engineer's face bearing the weight of someone who had spent the last 6 hours making final preparations for an event that defied comprehension. "Captain, all ship systems are operating within acceptable parameters for Prometheus deployment. I've rerouted power from life support and artificial gravity to ensure maximum charging capacity. We'll have approximately 47 minutes of normal environmental conditions after activation before we need to switch to emergency reserves." The tactical implications were clear: they would have less than an hour to observe the results of their weapon before their own ship systems began to fail. If the Prometheus device didn't stop the Vexhai fleet immediately, the Aurora Blueshift would be defenseless when the aliens closed to weapons range. It was a gamble with stakes that encompassed not just their own lives, but the future of human consciousness itself. Commander Nerian appeared at his side, her usually impeccable uniform showing signs of the sleepless hours she had spent refining targeting solutions and tactical scenarios. "Sir, I've completed final calculations for optimal deployment geometry. If we activate the device at the projected intercept point, we should catch the entire Vexhai pursuit fleet within the primary effect zone while minimizing cascade propagation toward inhabited systems." Valdres studied the tactical display she activated, noting the complex three-dimensional geometry required to maximize their chances of success. The Prometheus device would need to be deployed with split-second timing, its activation precisely coordinated with the enemy fleet's position to ensure complete coverage. A miscalculation of even a few seconds could allow some Vexhai ships to escape the effect zone, leaving them free to continue their genocidal mission. "Distance to optimal deployment point?" he asked, though the answer was already visible on the chronometer that had been counting down their final hours. 17 minutes, 34 seconds at current velocity, Nerian replied. "The Vexhai fleet will achieve weapons range approximately 3 minutes after optimal deployment time, giving us a very narrow window for successful activation." Dr. Mordek joined them on the bridge, the elderly scientist moving with the careful deliberation of someone carrying an enormous burden. In his hands, he held a simple activation key, a quantum-encrypted device that would trigger the most powerful weapon humanity had ever created. The key itself was unremarkable, looking more like an antique pocket watch than an instrument of cosmic destruction. "Captain, I want to be absolutely clear about what we're about to do," Mordek said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had spent his entire career pushing the boundaries of human knowledge, only to discover that some boundaries existed for good reason. "The Prometheus device will stop the Vex-High fleet, but it will also fundamentally alter the quantum foundations of consciousness for every sentient being within several light-years. We're not just changing the course of this war, we're potentially changing what it means to be human." Valdris accepted the activation key, feeling its surprising weight in his palm. Such a small object to carry such enormous consequences, he thought. Around him, the bridge crew prepared for an event that would either save their species or transform it beyond recognition. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to preserve humanity from alien extermination, they might accomplish what the Vex-High had failed to do: erase human consciousness from the universe. "All stations, report readiness for Prometheus deployment," he commanded, his voice carrying across the ship's communication system to reach every member of his crew. One by one, department heads confirmed their preparation for an event that none of them truly understood but all of them knew was necessary. The countdown continued its relentless progression toward zero, each passing second bringing them closer to a moment that would define the future of two species and possibly the nature of reality itself. The moment of activation arrived with the quiet precision of a clockwork universe fulfilling its most terrible destiny. Captain Valdris stood at the center of the Aurora Blueshift's bridge, the activation key steady in his hand as the final seconds counted down toward an event that would reshape the fundamental nature of existence in this region of space. Around him, his crew maintained their positions with the disciplined calm of people who had accepted that they were about to step beyond the known boundaries of human experience. "Prometheus device shows full charge and optimal configuration," Dr. Mordek reported from his position at the weapon control station. The elderly scientist's hands moved across his console with surgical precision, making final calibrations to systems that operated on principles barely understood by their creators. "Quantum containment fields are stable, reality anchors are engaged, and cascade limiters are, well, they're functioning as designed, though I still cannot guarantee their effectiveness." Commander Nerian's tactical display showed the Vex-High pursuit fleet in perfect three-dimensional detail, their alien vessels arranged in geometric patterns that seemed to mock human understanding of space combat doctrine. The enemy ships continued their approach with the relentless confidence of predators who had never known defeat, unaware that they were sailing toward their own annihilation, or transformation. "Enemy fleet will reach optimal intercept coordinates in 30 seconds, Nerian announced, her voice carrying the steady professionalism that had made her one of the finest tactical officers in the human fleet. "All Vex-High vessels are within projected primary effect zone. Cascade propagation vectors are clear of inhabited systems, though long-range effects remain unpredictable." Lieutenant Thex looked up from his engineering station, sweat beading on his forehead despite the bridge's carefully controlled environment. "Captain, all ship systems are optimized for post-activation operations. We have 43 minutes of emergency power if primary systems fail, and escape pods are prepped for immediate launch if the cascade effect proves more extensive than calculated." Valdris nodded, understanding that his young engineer was preparing for the possibility that the Prometheus device might affect their own ship despite its theoretical safety margin. The weapon operated on principles so advanced that even its creators couldn't predict all of its consequences. They were about to conduct the ultimate experiment with the survival of their species hanging in the balance. 15 seconds to optimal deployment, Nerian counted down, her fingers poised over the tactical controls that would coordinate the device's activation with the enemy fleet's position. All systems show green. Vex-high vessels maintaining approach vector and velocity. Valdris raised the activation key, feeling the weight of 2 billion human souls in its quantum-encrypted circuitry. Somewhere ahead of them, the Kepler system continued its ancient orbital dance, unaware that its fate was about to be decided by a weapon that challenged the very foundations of reality. Behind them, the Vex-high fleet pressed forward with their mission of genocide, confident in their technological superiority and their belief that humanity represented a fundamental error in the universe's design. 10 seconds. 5. 3. 2. Activation. Valdris turned the key. Reality screamed. The Prometheus device activated with a sound that existed beyond mere audio, a fundamental alteration in the quantum foundations of spacetime that registered as pure wrongness in every conscious mind within 1,000 light-years. The Aurora Blueshift shuddered as waves of restructured reality washed over her hull, her advanced sensors struggling to process data streams that no longer followed conventional physics. On the tactical display, the Vex-high fleet simply ceased. Not destroyed, not scattered, erased from existence as if they had never been. The space they had occupied moments before now showed readings that hurt to interpret directly, regions where matter and energy followed rules that human minds weren't equipped to comprehend. But the cascade was spreading. 6 months after the activation of the Prometheus device, Captain Zephyr Valdris stood in the observation lounge of Kepler Station, watching ships move through space in patterns that still challenged his understanding of physics. The vessels themselves were recognizably human in design, but they moved with a fluid grace that spoke to fundamental changes in how their crews perceived and interacted with reality. The cascade effect had been more extensive than Dr. Mordek had predicted, and far more subtle in its consequences. The old scientist himself sat nearby, his once brilliant mind now operating in ways that defied conventional description. Mordek could still conduct conversations and perform research, but his consciousness seemed to exist partially outside normal spacetime, allowing him to perceive possibilities and connections that remained invisible to unaffected humans. He had become something more than human, but also something fundamentally different from what he had been before. The Vex-high are gone, Mordek observed, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions beyond the audible spectrum. Not just their ships, but their entire species. The cascade effect propagated through quantum entanglement networks that connected every member of their race across the galaxy. We didn't just stop their invasion, we edited them out of existence entirely. Valdris nodded, still grappling with the magnitude of what they had accomplished and what it had cost. The Prometheus device had indeed saved humanity from extinction, but it had also transformed roughly 30% of the human population within the affected region. These changed humans, the elevated, as they had come to call themselves, possessed cognitive abilities that bordered on prescience, but they also struggled to relate to their unmodified cousins in ways that created new and troubling social divisions. Commander Nerian appeared in the lounge's entrance, her presence now preceded by subtle alterations in local spacetime that marked her as one of the elevated. Her transformation had been one of the most dramatic, her tactical genius enhanced to levels that allowed her to perceive strategic possibilities across multiple probable futures simultaneously. Yet something essential had been lost in the process. The warm humanity that had made her such an effective leader had been replaced by a cold efficiency that served their new reality but left her isolated from her former self. The outer colonies are reporting successful integration of elevated governance councils, she announced, her voice carrying information on multiple quantum frequencies that only other elevated could fully interpret. Productivity has increased by 300%, and we've achieved technological breakthroughs that should have taken centuries to develop. The cascade effect appears to be self-limiting, with no new transformations reported in the past 60 days. Valdris accepted the report with the weary resignation of a man who had saved his species by fundamentally altering it. The human civilization that emerged from the cascade effect was undeniably more advanced, more capable, and more unified than what had existed before. Crime had virtually disappeared in elevated communities, poverty had been eliminated through perfect resource allocation, and humanity's technological advancement had accelerated beyond all previous projections. But the children born to elevated parents showed cognitive patterns that barely registered as human to pre-cascade observers. They thought in quantum probabilities rather than linear cause and effect, communicated through subtle alterations in local reality rather than spoken language, and seemed to regard unmodified humans with the benevolent but distant affection that adults might show toward beloved pets. Dr. Mordek stood and walked to the observation window, his transformed perception allowing him to see the quantum threads that connected all consciousness throughout the galaxy. "We won, Captain. Humanity survives and prospers. But the question that haunts me is whether what we saved can still be called human, or if we simply replaced one form of extinction with another." Through the transparent aluminum, ships continued their eternal dance through the void, their crews representing a species that had evolved beyond recognition in the span of a single moment. The Aurora Blueshift herself remained in dock, her exotic matter drive now obsolete compared to the reality manipulation engines that the Elevated had developed. She served as a monument to the old humanity, a reminder of what they had been before they chose transformation over death. Valdris placed his hand against the window, feeling the subtle vibrations of a universe that no longer operated according to the rules he had learned as a child. Somewhere in the quantum foam that underlay reality, the consciousness patterns of 2 billion Vexi continued to exist in a state that defied description, not dead, not alive, but simply other. They had been transformed by the same cascade that had elevated humanity, but their transformation had taken a different path, one that led away from individual existence towards something that might have been transcendence or might have been oblivion. The war was over. Humanity had won. But as Valdris watched the Elevated crews pilot their ships through folded space with casual efficiency, he wondered if victory and defeat were really so different when viewed from the perspective of quantum eternity. They had preserved their species by becoming something new, and in the end, perhaps that was the only kind of survival that any civilization could hope to achieve when faced with the infinite possibility space of a universe that cared nothing for their continued existence. The stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the small dramas of consciousness that played out in their shadows, while reality itself adjusted to accommodate the new rules that humanity had written into its fundamental structure. It was, Valdris reflected, exactly the kind of ending that the old humanity would have called bittersweet, a word that might no longer have meaning for the transformed beings they had become.